Good evening, everybody. We're here for a hearing on the application at 728 Randolph Avenue. Our last hearing was on August 17th. We were supposed to meet a week ago, but that was canceled a bit late in the game due to the voting that was taking place on September 6th. So here we are. I think we had planned to meet on the 6th to review the final plans, and we had reserved tonight for voting and for drafting of the decision. Obviously, that schedule has been messed with a little bit, and so here we are. Peter, I don't know how you want to proceed tonight. I know that since the last hearing, we've received additional materials both from your team as well as from the town's planning board. And I believe a couple of other things. We can address those. Or is there anything else that we need to address before getting into the revised plans?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Peter Freeman representing the applicant. And I agree with what you said. We also had, I believe, the workshop, quote unquote, with the fire chief and town planner, Tim, Sean and Deb and Rob and myself. Also was productive. I don't know if there's a memo or a report from Tim, but in any case, we did do that. And then there were the recent submissions that showed the final design, showing the revisions to the entrance, the level, quote unquote, entryway, the turning radius also that the fire chief had asked for, and also a memorandum that had been requested from Sean in terms of stating our position through Deborah Keller, our professional engineer, as to the design that we have, which we believe is our final design on the roadway, the entrance and the level entrance and all of that. So what I think makes sense is that we have Deb present those briefly, naturally, questions from you folks and comments, of course, from Sean. And then I don't think there's really anything else that has changed unless Rob or Andy, you have something else that I've forgotten. So with your permission, I would say let's have Deborah explain and then Sean, and then we can see where we go from there.
All right, unless there are any objections from my fellow board members, I think that's a good way to proceed. Barring any objections, let's go with that.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully that's viewable to everybody seeing the plan cover sheet for the civil set.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So Deborah Keller for the record from Merrill Engineers and Land Surveyors. So as stated, we did submit a revised set of plans. One thing that I would like to add, it's very minor, but I'm going to add it just because it wasn't an additional information. One of the questions was for 736 to locate the water service to make sure that we weren't impacting it. We did track that information down through the water department, and the water service line runs parallel with the sewer in the front of this building outside of the proposed work. So none of those utilities would be impacted by the project. I think I'm going to zip. Well, I'll start here, I think. Through our workshop and comments that have come up, looking at the approach at Randolph Street, trying to get to an acceptable level approach at the entrance, moving up through, maintaining maximum 10% grade, and having a proper connection to the 718 property here. One of the things that we did to everything kind of works hand in hand and linked here. We needed to shift the driveway to the north approximately 15 feet. So now there is somewhat of a curve here along the 718 driveway coming into the shared portion. What that does for us is allows us to, and I'm going to created a new sheet, profile sheet here for the plan set, illustrating the profile of the road as you come up and down into the garage, and then a small profile showing the profile along the Driscoll 718 driveway here. So Randolph Ave at this portion of the profile. And as you move forward, here's the level approach matching I think we're 4 inches off. So, but basically matching the existing grades that we have on site for the full 50 feet. We do have a max. I zoom in here, you can see it. I believe the existing grade through the entrance is 3.8%. We're at 4.25% for the 50-foot approach up to transit into it's 9.9. So it's basically 10% grade. Coming up this here, we level out a little bit, which is right at the intersection with the 718 driveway. Moving back to the high point, which is here at the entrance into the parking lot. And then as you see, the profile dives back down into the garage. So we are meeting the 10% grade requirement for the driveway, as well as providing the 4.25% approach on the entry area. While maintaining, this here is showing the cross section in the shared driveway portion, a 14% grade for the 718 driveway. And notably what you see here with the existing condition is because we're shifting the driveway over and putting it sort of into a raised graded area. So that's why you see that a little bit of cut there. So shifting this allows us to raise that sort of length intersection area, providing more length here to provide the approach at the driveway. We did, as mentioned, I did prepare a summary letter just showing, explaining our thought process and justification for this design. And as we did speak with the fire chief and through our review process, we reference back to the Milton rules and regulations for the planning board, which I believe were identified in previous comments, to look at a sufficient length of an approach that is substantially level. But there is no specific criteria in the rules and regulations as to what those maximum limits would be to be considered a level approach. So with that being said, we look at what are the safety requirements. So we looked back to the fire department as well as the fire safety codes, which is where we've gotten our references in previous discussions as a maximum driveway grade of 10%. And within discussions, it was indicated that a 5% approach for the length of an emergency vehicle, which is on average, 50 feet covers us there, would be what would be required at this approach. So with a 4.25%, we're looking at meeting that requirement, maintaining the 10% throughout the shared driveway component. We're meeting those safety requirements. Within my memorandum, we referenced a couple of, obviously we didn't go into full research, but we did pull out some recent projects that were reviewed and approved through the town. Most notably would be the subdivision down the street, which is Jill Kathleen Lane. I believe it's about 1,000 feet away from this property off of Pleasant Street, which was an approved subdivision, which has a 4.5% approach to the subdivision entrance. We've identified two others, one which is the Milton Woods, which was approved in 2017, which has a 3% grade approach, as well as Walcott Woods, which was a road, an internal driveway connection because of topography constraints was greater than 5% grade at the entrance to the intersection. Just for, sort of recent samples of projects that have approved through the town with similar approaches to the proposed project that we have before us today. I don't believe so. So we did go through the plan set and adjust them all so that we corresponded with, adjusting the grading, the landscaping, and site layout to accommodate that reconfiguration of the driveway, as well as the TMP plans were updated. No other changes. So that change in grade here does not impact the site distance calculations, which still meet the requirements. If I can keep this moving. Let's see if I can skip through this. Last page, I believe, is the landscaping. So landscaping, again, it was a minor change, but we updated the driveway shift accordingly on the plan set to be consistent. I'm going to zoom back up to the top. One other thing we did with our discussions with the fire chief, we looked at 2 other truck movements. I'm going to open those files here. So of course I updated them again with the configuration, looking at, standard delivery truck, waste management. Come on. Waste management vehicle. I apologize, my computer's being a little slow. But the 2 new vehicle turns that we did was making sure that an emergency vehicle, which was referenced by the fire chief, which is a Typhoon. So we modeled that to make sure that it could make this turn and up into the 718 for accessibility, as well as he asked, and we had a little bit of a discussion on if a vehicle did pull down the driveway, could they back up into the parking lot and turn around. So we did that for the Typhoon and the emergency vehicle, and that does work. What would happen if it was a ladder truck that pulled down here? Again, the fire chief, just to be clear, mentioned that no vehicles would be entering the structure, but if one wanted to pull down this portion of the driveway, they would back up to about this location that you see this vehicle here and have to come in and utilize the fire turning movement that's within the parking lot. I apologize that my screen is frozen at the moment, but those are the changes. Let me try this again, see if it'll work, that we've made since we met last. I can pass it back to you, Peter.
Sure.
Deborah, can you hear me? This is Andrew Zaleski, the architect.
Yes.
I think it'd be useful just to point out in your the chart that shows the grade of the road that you exaggerated the vertical scale. The road actually isn't as steep as it appears in the chart. It's done for visual purposes, but the road is actually not as even as steep as it looks there because the vertical scale is different from the horizontal.
Yes, it's actually a 2-to-1, so it is relatively close. But yes, you are correct. There is a slight exaggeration in the profile.
If I may just ask a quick question, can you describe, when you say that you moved the driveway further north, can you describe that a little more? Where was it and where was it now? Where was it moved?
Sure. So I'm going to take my a little hand here and show you where the existing driveway is. So this is the southerly side of the driveway right here. And then this coming straight down here is the northerly side of the existing driveway. And there's a little turnout here before it turns into a gravel driveway coming up to the existing 728 dwelling. So right now they drive down, make this bend here and come down the main driveway. And so now what we're doing is where we pushed it was sort of angled it slightly so that we're pushing the maximum distance would be here where it's approximately on average 12 to 15 feet of a shift. And I was going from center to center because we widened out the entrance of the driveway. It's wider than the current driveway now, to provide a good swing to be able to turn around, so it's not a sharp turn. So now we're tying into at the property line. We're bringing the southerly curb line along here and making the bend here into the shared driveway. And this would be the northerly edge. And so this is where the bump out starting right here comes around and ties into the driveway here. So instead of coming straight down and making the turn here, making a slight bend here and coming into the shared driveway here and turning.
Okay, thank you.
And Michael, that does two things for us. It makes the driveway longer, so it can be shallower, and it also intersects with the new driveway from the development. It intersects at a higher elevation, again, so that we can make that driveway from 718 a little bit shallower.
Yep.
And in doing so, the applicant's been able to accommodate a slightly shallower approach from Randolph Avenue. So all just an exercise in sort of trying to maximize what we can do with the site that's available.
Mm-hmm.
Understood. Thank you.
And this came out of our working session. That's why I said we.
Thank you, Sean. So I think that covers our changes. I don't know, Sean, if you have, did I miss anything, or I don't know where we'd like to go next.
Can I ask you a couple of quick questions, unless the board wants to ask some first?
Go ahead, Sean.
So Deb, I presume the fire department can also use the access road to fight a fire as well, or is there a way for them to turn around at the end of the access road? You know?
I'm not 100% sure what the access road does as it passes our frontage. I didn't really look into that, but I do recall in our meeting that the chief mentioned that they do have keys and to access the gate so that they would be able to access the access road. And he indicated that provides complete access to the structure.
Right. So that would mitigate a good deal of our concern about the awkwardness of some of these movements. So the fire department has the ability to fight from both sides of the building using separate access points.
So, oops, if I can get to a site. Yeah, so they'd be able to come up and utilize the parking space here as well as the access drive. Oh, I think my computer's tired.
Michael, would you like me to share my thoughts on sort of the issue at hand before we move on to something else?
That would be helpful.
So the issue we've got here is, I mean, I remember vividly from day one of the first meetings, the board's concern about the safety of people moving to and from Randolph Avenue to the site drive. So from day one, that's been a sort of a constant refrain. And we've got some sort of challenges here. And, you know, let me preface my remarks by Deb has done an amazing job sort of dealing with difficult situations. So I don't want anybody to think my comments in any way suggest that she could have done better. I mean, she's done fantastic. So that being said, you know, we have some sort of nuanced challenges or you know, subtle issues that are issues nonetheless. And my main issue is right now is they're adding 40 units that's connecting to a recognized difficult location. We don't really have sort of standards, literal standards for 40B projects because they sort of exist outside the normal framework. But what I've done is tried to compare to subdivision standards, because in my mind, the driveway doesn't really act like a driveway. It more acts like a subdivision roadway because it's serving 40 new units, 2 existing units, different properties. So, you know, in my mind, it's analogous to a subdivision roadway. And in Milton, the subdivision standards, as Deb mentioned, require a substantially level approach. and unfortunately doesn't provide anything like that. But in my mind, that's a standard that the board's going to have to struggle with in terms of, we're approving a project that if it can't meet the subdivision standards for design of how it connects into a road, at this particular location, there's a sensitivity that would suggest that, that might be a challenge to the board, because you're in a sense authorizing something that doesn't comply with your subdivision standards. Now, we could view level in a lot of different ways. And I think what Deb has said, in their mind, 4.25% is level. Now, again, these are all very, very subtle differences. So I don't want to suggest that that we're going to have people careening out of control or anything like that because it's 4% and not 3%. But the issue is do we have some standard that can justify to the board that the 4.25 is acceptable? And I've struggled to find something, and I can't. So the best I've been able to sort of justify is 3%, because I could reasonably draw a conclusion that anything less than 3% is essentially level, because when you're doing your site distance calculations, AASHTO requires you to adjust for anything over 3%. So I think there's a sort of a comfortable analogous situation there that, yeah, there's justification for 3% being level approach. I also have examples of other subdivision regulations that allow 2 to 3% approach slopes. So I'm comfortable that if the project could have got to 3%, that we could have sort of justified that was a level approach. At 4.25%, we have some challenges, because we're now over the 3% that AASHTO requires you to make adjustments for site distance. So it's sort of hard to argue that would be level. The 4.25% exceeds the current driveway approach, I think, which is like 3.8. So we're left in this situation where, that it's above something that we can demonstrate as being sort of consistent with subdivision regulations. And I'll put this all in my letter, but it puts us in a difficult situation.
If I might respond, and I appreciate Sean's willingness to work with us, and it's been a pleasure trying to work through these challenges. But I do respectfully disagree. For one, the 3%, and I'll let Emily interrupt me if I'm speaking incorrectly here, for site distances is applied to the main roadway and not the road in which the stop condition is at. So it's hard to sort of use that in comparison. I do understand that that's their criteria where they then change it, because there's slope on that main road that you need to now look down and make sure that you have that visual distance along that main roadway. But I would also mention that there is not any specific criteria defined in the subdivision regulations, and therefore that is why we turned to the safety criteria through the fire code as well as the fire department to meet those requirements within this situation. I do agree that even with our samples, we showed subdivisions in town that vary, and one had a 3% slope for the approach, but we had others that were greater. Most notably, the one which is right here on Pleasant Street, not very far away, which has a 4.5% approach slope. So that would be in a similar project from a driveway perspective or a roadway perspective, looking at that approach. And I guess I look at it from the perspective that I understand this is 40 unit development and we want it safe, but if 4.5% is adequate for the subdivision safety over here, why would it not be for this project, both in the same town in close vicinity to each other?
My position on that would be they're fundamentally different roads. Randolph and Jill Kathleen Lane are fundamentally different.
But we're following the same subdivision rules and regs. I think we all are at the same.
Doesn't common sense play into this at all? I mean, you can't, it seems, sorry to interrupt, but it seems hard for me to understand how a regulation that requires flat can be unflat. You know, I mean, I understand you're making comparisons. I know there's no you're saying there's no standard. If flat isn't defined, level isn't defined in the planning board statute regulations. Sorry, but that doesn't mean it can be a serious incline. You know, and I think whatever slope is chosen has to take into account the roadway into which this driveway is emptying. You cited Wolcott, Woodlot Lane or whatever is one of the examples. That enters into a 2-lane road, not a 4-lane state highway. So I'm troubled by and I totally appreciate the work that you've done in trying to, fit a square peg in a round hole, but I'm concerned about a 4.25% slope going into a state highway with an possibly icy snow-covered road and people sliding into traffic proceeding at 45 miles an hour. That's really troublesome to me.
So just for a bit of a comparison here to show you, and I'm going to zoom up close to the entrance. This would be your 50 feet entrance approach that we're looking at. So we are basically level with the existing grade, and where the change is right in here, which is 4 inches. So we're not looking to change that approach by, a foot or 2 feet. So I think we've all been out to the site to date. And when you enter into that driveway, I don't see it as being, a 10%. It's not, when you're driving into that driveway currently as you approach, and then when you get into the steeper incline, which is up in the, up further up into that driveway. So I guess that's where I'm looking at it from, is that, we tried to maintain the existing driveway. And yes, there is a small portion where we're 4 inches off from matching the existing condition.
The existing condition is designed to handle, or is handling, two houses, and you're proposing 40. So I understand that it's meeting it. I understand what you're saying, but the use we're asking to this roadway to take on is substantially higher than what's currently there.
So my point here, if I could just put a little bit, Deb, to help you out here, this project needs to be fair and equitable, not just for one applicant on Pleasant Street. It's for everyone. So you can't say just because this is a 40B project, we're going to impose certain bylaws and rules and regulations and design criteria. So we don't have, if we had a design criteria of 3%, then we would have to live with it. Okay. So if we had a design criteria of 5%, we'd have to live with it. So if we don't have a design criteria, then you can't say common sense. But so common sense, you mentioned about common sense. So we're talking about in a 50-foot run. So from Randolph Ave, 50 feet back, we're talking 24 inches. So I'm pretty sure everyone knows what 24 inches is. It's 2 feet. So basically, the common sense aspect, are cars going to be sliding into Randolph Ave 50 feet back at 2 feet? Common sense says no. So that's not going to happen. If we were at 10% slope, I'd have to agree with you and say, all right, we're going to have an issue here. So we don't have a design criteria. This project needs to be fair and equitable for a 40B residential subdivision, and any type of applicant. We can't just say because it's a 40B, we're going to make you do this. And if it's a single family subdivision that we'd want to approve this project, we're going to allow you to do this. So we've abided by all the design criteria. We've and all the comments by the peer reviewer, which are a lot. We've made a lot of changes, and we feel that this project is designed. Deb did a very, very good job, an excellent job of designing this project. and it's buildable, it's workable, and and it abides by all the rules and design criteria by the town, federal, state, fire, all that.
Mr. Chairman, if I may also just briefly, Peter Freeman again, and thank you, Rob. I certainly understand the mutual respect, and that includes me respecting Sean. I think picking up on several things, the term level is in some ways unfortunate because it doesn't mean level. Everybody knows that really it's some type of lower than the rest of the roads in the subdivisions, or in this case, the site entrance. As Rob just said, and everybody knows, if it's 10%, that's a no-brainer. But level doesn't really mean level. So the question doesn't, the question isn't, well, why isn't it level? With no standard, the challenge is, and I appreciate the way Sean put it, it is a challenge to good faith and experienced qualified engineers with a disagreement as to whether there's a meaningful difference between 3% and 4.25. The explanation that Rob gave, I think, is helpful. But the other thing, if you look at Deb's memo, the one that was submitted dated September 12th on the driveway grading and level approach, it does cite the existing safety standards, which includes what she described, which requires for the fire department code really just 5%. There's also a submission that we made from Jeff Bandini from McMahon Associates, our traffic consultant, that also opines that, having looked at this plan, that he believes it's safe in terms of, from his viewpoint, the traffic, the cars that will be there. So I'm not saying that it's not something that you folks on the board, don't have to grapple with, but I think it's, it's something that is not super clear cut. We're not that far apart from what Sean is suggesting. Apparently, and unfortunately, yes, the site pretty much dictates that to accommodate all the other things and satisfy the fire chief, which we have, remember, we have satisfied the fire chief as to the entire roadway. This is what we have arrived at. So it is complicated, but I don't think it's black and white where it's easy to say that we do not comply with a safety standard.
I don't think anyone's saying that, Mr. Freeman. I think we're exploring the basis for Ms. Keller's suggestion that this grade is safe as it approaches Randolph Ave. And part of that criteria is the samples chosen to compare this to, one of which is Jill Kathleen coming into Pleasant Street, which is a one-way, one lane, very narrow, very slow moving street, for one. And number two, if we're using other criteria in the absence of criteria that directly applies here, then I think we should look at those. And there are criteria for use in other situations for a reason. And there are percentages of the incline that are used in those situations. And so I can't, I'm not just going to abandon the idea that that there needs to be some standard here, and there is some grade that is safe, and there's some grade that's not safe. And I think common sense does come into play when you appreciate the fact that this is a huge development with a lot of units. That's a great expansion of what's currently there, going into the busiest street in this town, if not the county. And I think this is a worthwhile discussion. So, I'm not discounting what you're saying. I'm not discounting what Mr. Celebrity has said, but it's definitely something we need to talk about, and it's a big problem with this development.
I respect what you said, and as I say, I understand you do need to grapple with it. In terms of presentation, that really, that is what we have. I think we went over some building design changes and some landscaping things last time, which I don't think need to be repeated, although naturally we can answer questions from the board on any aspect of the project as you wish. But that's really what we have to present, and without in any way jumping the gun on what you would like to do, I am hoping that we would have another hearing. And even though it's a week later than we had expected, because we couldn't have September 6th, that we basically follow the scenario that the chairman outlined at the beginning, that at the next hearing, which presumably would be the last, that, a vote would be taken, and the the decision, that there's a draft, which I know, I purposely didn't necessarily put in all the conditions that you might want. But I think it's certainly at a minimum, a very good outline, more than a skeleton, if I may say so, that with Tim and Judy having the time to do it over the next week or so, that's where I hope, would be at without much discomfort for anybody.
Well, we currently have a deadline of 10 days from now, right? And so Crystal had emailed me that the only remaining day before the 23rd is the 20th, which is a week from tonight. And we still need to draft the decision. So I don't know if we have time to have another hearing, but I'll leave this to my more experienced colleagues on the board, Mr. Gray, Mr. Mullen. I don't know what you think with respect to the remaining schedule.
I think the development director's got his hand up. Maybe
Yeah,
he
Tim,
needs something there.
Mr. Chewinski.
I didn't mean to be tantalizing with that. I just wanted to mention, I think Cliff Bomer had to pop off and he's back. I think he's in the participants pool. And if he could be promoted, I don't know if he has any commentary or anything to add, but I told him I would chime in on that.
Thanks, Tim. And as usual, we get carried away with what we're talking about, and I neglect to look to the public for their and to Mr. Bomer. Cliff, do you have anything that you'd like to add to this?
While we're waiting for Cliff, Michael, in the past, I mean, the requirement is to close the hearing within the statutory period, but then you'd have time to deliberate the decision. The key being, we don't take testimony after the hearing closes.
Okay.
So the concern in the past has been, to the extent that deliberations require the introduction or suggest the introduction of additional testimony, you really couldn't get that in. But you've got an additional period, I believe it's 40 days between the close of the hearing and the issuance of the decision.
It's 40 days. That's correct.
Yeah. Thank you. I was confusing those deadlines.
And Michael, I think I can get what I would consider a final letter to you by the end of next week.
By the end of this week or the end of next week?
Not by the end of this week, by the deadline.
Okay.
Of your hearing date. So it'll be close, but I think it's down to one single issue, so it shouldn't be that hard.
Can I ask you, Sean, or Deb, or anybody really, did I hear that the fire chief was involved in the joint meeting with the developer, and he's okay with the revisions as submitted?
Yes, that was the workshop that had been suggested.
I don't. He was part of the revision process. I don't know if he hasn't commented on the outcome of that meeting. So he was, yes, an active participant. All of these ideas were floated past him. These things were discussed with him. So he's informed, and I can say that it's consistent with what we discussed at that meeting, but I don't know if he's sort of blessed the revised submission yet.
Tim, do you know if that's something he intends to do, or?
We can get a final kind of wrap up comment letter from the fire chief for the record. I agree with Sean. Chief Madden's been there kind of every step of the way. But I think for the sake of completeness, we'll get a comment letter, him, acknowledging his satisfaction or lack of satisfaction. I think he's pretty okay with this so far, but we'll get a final comment letter ahead of next week's deadline.
Okay, I mean, is there a purpose for having another hearing, or should we just wait for Sean's responses and potentially the fire chief's responses, and then deliberate? Can we do that, or do we need to have a hearing to officially close the hearing?
So the issue is just that you would need to keep the hearing open to accept any additional written testimony, like Sean's final letter or whatever. You wouldn't be able to receive that once the hearing was closed. So there would be a reason to hold it open for that purpose. I do see Cliff has his hand raised, by the way. I'm not sure.
But Michael, there's not a problem with having a hearing that takes, testimony gets closed and you can deliberate it the same night. If that's, that's the way to address that. If that's what you're thinking.
Yeah, I'm trying to buy Sean
It's just,
time. to
you gotta
finish it.
close it. You can't close it after the deadline.
Yeah, if the only remaining availability for a hearing is the 20th, I want to buy Sean enough time to get his letter finished.
I see.
It doesn't sound like that's going to happen before the 20th, so I'm just trying to figure out how to get all that done.
Right.
Cliff, while we're pondering that, do you want to add anything?
I'm sorry, I had a couple technical issues. I did have a couple of comments. I do think that certainly the thing that's been troubling me the most is coming to grips with the degree to which the slope is a safety issue or isn't a safety issue. That's really important. I'm sure the answer is somewhere between using common sense and already well-established standards. So that to me has been an issue from day one. I think some of the associated issues of the proximity of the driveway to the single family home that also had some safety issues have advanced for sure. They've gotten better. So I think from my perspective, and I'm not a civil engineer, I know treatments that can be done to driveways that make them less likely to ice up, but I'm having trouble, and maybe the board is too, at really figuring out what kind of risk we're talking about. I do have just a couple comments. I think the building design, I think, is advanced probably as far as we're going to see it advance. I remain frustrated that because it is such a densely packed site, there's very little opportunity for really consolidating green space so that you really have more programmable green space on the site. I think there have been some improvements made for sure, but I still believe that for a development of this size, we're really kind of hitting minimum numbers. A couple things that I wish had changed that I would still encourage the applicant to look at, and maybe the board to support, I'm troubled by the landscaping plan. I think generally speaking, it's a very linear kind of wall-like approach to landscaping, which is kind of hide the building rather than making it fit in. I think we talked last time about potentially integrating some of that space on the northwest corner where currently the playground is, really looking at what's in there, cataloging what's in that space and whether it should be enhanced and maybe introduce a more naturalized landscape plan. I think more importantly, I personally think it would be better to flip the location of the dog park and the playground. I think the playground where it's directly accessible from the building without crossing the parking lot makes a lot more sense than having the playground on the other side of the parking lot. But otherwise, I think that's kind of where we are. I think a little more creative approach to the landscaping so that we're not trying to wall off the development, and certainly figuring out what standard to use to really determine the safety at the bottom of that driveway, I think is premier in my mind.
Thanks, Cliff. Mr. Freeman, any comments on what Mr. Bomer just said?
No, I appreciate that. And, it was essentially what we had heard last time. And I think he's correct that we've done all that we think we can, which we do think is acceptable and complies with standards and all of that. So no, just thank you, Mr. Bomer.
Mr. Freeman, I was wondering, did you have a chance to look at the planning board's submission? I think it was earlier this week or maybe the end of last week.
We did, and although it's a general response, you know, as always, we respect another board's input, but they've raised essentially the same types of concerns. And in terms of density and those types of comments, we don't feel as though there should be a concern about that. The safety aspects, of course, we've gone over thoroughly with you folks. So if there's anything from their memo that you would like to ask about in particular, that's fine, but we didn't think we needed a specific response.
One thing that I can think of off the top of my head was the singular access to emergency vehicles, the way that the building is currently situated. And I didn't know if that was a concern based on a conversation with the fire chief or what. Do you have any insight there?
Well, I have insight, but I can't tell you one way or the other whether that comment was a result of any conversation with the fire chief. I can say based on my direct contact at that workshop with the fire chief that I would doubt that very much, because he was certainly satisfied with the single access, you know, both because he explained what he wanted on the slopes and he was okay with it. The turning radius, he was okay with it. And as Sean just asked about and explained, the access road is another means of getting to the back of the building, because he specifically said they have a key. So he did not in any way encourage or even express concern about a second means of emergency access.
Thank you. Before we start talking about scheduling again, is there any member of the public with their hand raised that would like to be heard? Mr. Driscoll, I see your hand is raised. Feel free to speak.
Yes, thank you, the Board of Appeals. I appreciate you enduring all this. We just saw this driveway plan last night, and I just feel like me and my family are like a doormat to this whole process. I told specifically that I don't want to be jeopardized when I'm plowing my driveway, and having some sort of curb is going to jeopardize me plowing my driveway. And I don't know, Mr. Freeman might say I'm not qualified, but I am pretty good at plowing snow. And this little slight curve is going to mess me up plowing my driveway. And I said that from day one at these meetings. I didn't want to be bothered, you know, interfered with my plowing in my driveway. And this is a big issue for me. And they didn't even come to us about this driveway change. And you're all talking that it's a great thing, but last thing I know, me and my wife are paying a mortgage here. I think we should have been approached and talked about this, not finding out about it last night to a lawyer. So, from what I understand, we've been on this property for 31 years. I could go to land court and say that we're gonna fight this. You know, I would like my driveway to stay straight, and that's what I've been plowing it for 31 years, and I've been doing a great job at it. I do not agree with this curve. Thank you. And just like no one's talked to us about it. We just saw it last night through Mrs. McGettrick. And I just feel like we're a doormat. We're being looked over like we're nothing. And we do live here, and we're going to be stuck with this. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, just a brief comment, and I certainly understand and even sympathize with Mr. Driscoll, but certainly I don't think it's really appropriate or fair to say that he's been treated like a doormat. He has counsel. We've always gone through counsel. We didn't hold off on sending this latest revision to Ms. McKettrick. I wish it had been a little earlier, but the nature of the beast and everybody's schedules, that is when it was. And so dealing with the professionals and sending it at the same time to Ms. McKettrick, that's the best we could do. So if you thought we were in any way ignoring you specifically, I apologize, Mr. Driscoll, but because you have counsel, you know, that's who I've gone through. The other point is the existing straight driveway is not on the right of way. It's outside the right of way. So there is no right to do that. And the changes, as we say, and I don't mean to belabor it. Again, I do respect Mr. Driscoll. I know that this has impact on him, but the changes in our professional opinions comply with the status of the law where his access is actually, if anything, improved. So, you know, again, I just wanted to put that on the record. And again, I appreciate the comments.
I mean, it doesn't sound like he feels like his access is improved, but
Understood, but again, I respect his opinion and we respectfully disagree.
okay.
Mike, may I ask a question?
Yeah, is that Judy?
Yes, it is. Hi.
Yes,
Does
go
the
ahead.
board want to discuss the waiver requests before closing the hearing? I ask only because it's a little hard for me to know what to do in response to Peter's draft, because I'm not really sure where the board is going to land on this. Now, I'm not asking you to make a decision, but I think at least maybe a discussion about the waivers at the next meeting would probably be helpful.
Well, that's assuming everyone is available on the 20th. So let's address that question first.
Yeah.
Is there anybody who's not available on the 20th?
I may not be, but I'm not on the board. I mean, I can find out later kind of what the board decided to do, but
I mean, I have a planning board hearing in another, for a client next
Mhm.
week, which is going to present some difficulty for me unless we can do it at a different
Okay.
time.
I'm available that day, Michael. I can be flexible on the time if that helps.
I'm sure I could be flexible on time if the board would like me to participate.
To the extent I'm needed, same for me.
Jeff, are you available on the 20th?
What time?
I mean, my hearing is at 7, and that's probably something I cannot miss. I would say 5.
I could do 5. Is your meeting remote, Mike, or do you need to travel for it?
No, it's remote, so I can do it from here.
I can do 5.
Is it possible to do it at 5:30? And I know you're bending over backwards to accommodate, which I appreciate. I have it's not another hearing. It's a meeting slightly distant from my office, not too far. It just make it a little easier for me to still be able to do that meeting in a different project.
I mean, if we have to do that, yeah, but now we're limited to 90 minutes for the whole thing.
Right.
Is there any way that you could push that meeting up, Peter, a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. No, you folks make the decision that you need to do based on everybody's availability, and I'll certainly, accommodate the best I can. If I have to do something with that other meeting, I will. I may miss the group dinner, but that's okay.
Oh, you're playing golf?
No. It's a serious business meeting. It's a serious business meeting. Just that I think the client was springing for dinner afterwards, but I'm not worried about that.
We'll buy you dinner after this, Peter.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I'd really like to do it at 5 because I want to give us a lot of time given the timing of all this. And I apologize because it's my schedule that's pushing us all forward. But I think it's necessary. So let's plan on that. And that's assuming that Crystal is available and can arrange that. So Judy, if that's okay with you, I think we will make that the first order of business on Tuesday.
That's fine. Peter, do we have the waivers in a Word document? And if not, could you provide them? It's just a little bit easier to work with.
I think I do have it. Whether it's what was submitted to you, I'm not sure, but I can do that, send it to you.
That would be super. Thank you.
And Peter, if you could circulate that to the full board, that would be helpful.
Right. It's just easier to mark up.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask a question, which is really curiosity, and in a way, I guess it puts the board on the spot, and it's only sort of a sense at this point. I think we need to do what we said with the schedule and have that hearing. So if you folks aren't comfortable answering, I certainly understand. But as we've said, we feel the need, me and my client, to proceed with the plans being presented. But of course, we do know that there is the proposal, which will be on the town meeting warrant for the access road access. And I know that even if that's voted in, that you folks would have to look at the revised plans and all of that. But here's my question, whether it's a straw vote or an indication, and I know it's absolutely not binding, but a good faith indication, which is simply the question I'll ask. And if you're uncomfortable, I respect that. If the access road is voted for this project, and if, as soon as possible thereafter, we submit plans and presumably Sean would look at them and you're satisfied, do you folks, the three zoning board members, have a sense whether you would be positive on the project at that point because your biggest concerns would have been alleviated?
I mean, I can't speak for the other board members, and I see that there are a couple of people there with their hands raised. So I'll say my initial thought on that and then get out of the way. But I'm not comfortable making any commitment or suggestion of any results without seeing any revised plans, because I think that would significantly change the project. Mr. Mullen.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. As I say, no need to go further. I respect that. So that's fine. Thank you.
I do have a comment. I want to address, if that's okay, Michael.
Of course, yeah.
This access issue, just to give people my thoughts. I've listened tonight and listened to other places. Let me make 3 points. The first, in response to Mr. Bowman's point about the amount of tolerance that should be adhered to, in my opinion, we should have a low amount of tolerance on Route 28. We all have been, I certainly have worked on several projects on this road, not always successfully, and people know the history of the road and the concern that has been expressed several times in this hearing. It's been expressed by our peer reviewers. It's been chronicled over time. So I think this deserves a low tolerance, and I think Mr. Reardon indicated that. Number two, I am like Mr. Gray, and I think the chair, although the chair I don't think was as clear, I am also concerned about the access, independent of anything else, for all of the reasons stated. And then third, I don't think we've talked enough about the issue that I initially raised in the first or second hearing, and that is that this area is subject to an easement enjoyed by two abutters. I know that Mr. Freeman provided us with the MBM builders case. I appreciate him doing that. And I was familiar with that case, but I still don't, and to the extent the case is controlling, and I believe that it is, let me tell you what I think the case says. The first is that the parties should try to reach agreement. And I'm not sure that's happened here. And to the extent it may have happened in the past, that may have happened, but there's certainly been no agreement tried to reach on this proposal with both abutters. And I think the case is pretty clear that that's what the restatement requires. The second is that the standard on unilateral change of an easement, which is possible, still requires that there be no less utility of the easement created, no increase of burden on the use and enjoyment of the owner of the easement, and you can't frustrate the purpose of the easement. Now, I think that the changes to this easement, I think it does all of those, or certainly some of those. But even if it doesn't, MBM Builders doesn't permit the holder of the dominant estate, of the servient estate, self-help. You can't unilaterally execute it without a court order. And you don't have that. So I really feel like there needs to be more work on the nature of the access. And I think too much of the testimony has been as if the applicant owns the fee without being subject to the access rights of the two abutters. So I think there's all kinds of issues here that aren't present in other fact patterns that haven't been adequately discussed or considered and are troubling. So that's where I am on the access.
Thank you, Mr. Mullen.
You're welcome.
Yeah, in general, the conclusion as to the case, I disagree with. I think that's a fair reading of the case. In terms of the whole scenario, one of the aspects is simply, and I don't mean it to say that the concern isn't there. I respect Mr. Mullen's concern, but regardless of what the ultimate outcome is in the private matter, if it becomes a legal dispute as to the right of way, you know, I also cited the case law where that's not the bailiwick of the ZBA. Certainly, it's the developer's risk. If a court were to decide, if Mr. Driscoll were to challenge it, if a court were to decide against Mr. Celebrity, then it would have been his risk. It still is his risk. So again, I do understand, and it's helpful to hear that concern. So I'm not saying that Mr. Mullen shouldn't have raised it. Of course he should, and I appreciate it. But I would just say that, you know, ultimately, I think the decision has to be based, your decision has to be based not on your view of how that case would come out, but rather on all the issues that you have been discussing.
Yeah, I'm not basing it on my view of how the case would come out. I'm basing it on my view of the law. And you're asking us, the applicant's asking us to turn the entire decision on a claimed right of access that it doesn't seem to me it's there. And if
Well,
it
but
is there, it hasn't been, let me just finish. Again, let me finish. Let me finish, okay? And if you do believe it to be there, then you got to go to court and you've got to establish it be there. And you're actually alleging that you're acting as if you've got the right of self-help, and MBM doesn't give you that. So I think that might be the case, Mr. Freeman, on something that's ancillary or small. The whole application turns on access. And we've spent many hours talking about this. And I just don't think it's been discussed enough about the clear holding and the law of the restatement that's set forth in MBM. That's all.
I understand. The only thing I would say, not to beat a dead horse, is that the case law on in it, and I've litigated them, and the case law covers the main access on a road where a neighbor disputes it, and it has to go to land court, and not just the Housing Appeals Committee, but the courts on 40B and other zoning applications as well, not just 40B, say, hey, you know, that's a private matter, and ultimately be it land court or superior court has to decide it. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. As I pointed out there, that's the third concern I have, and I'm not resting my entire decision on MBM. I am pointing out we haven't discussed it enough, and I think there's been abundant testimony that the standard in MBM hasn't been met.
Ms. McKettrick, I see you have your hand up.
I do. Thank you.
I'm sorry, it's MPM.
Can't hear you. First of all, I have written a letter to the board. You won't even have it yet because Crystal wasn't here. And it is indeed true that I met with the Driscolls last evening. I received a copy of this plan last Friday, and I was fully occupied this weekend with medical issues with my family. So it's really unreasonable to say that we've had plenty of time to review these changed plans. This is very frustrating to be looking at this tonight. However, I also agree with a number of other comments that we've heard tonight that the issues are larger than this. And you know, we have said on behalf of the Driscolls from the beginning of this hearing process that we should be looking at alternative access, that all of these problems arise because of the use of the easement. And while there's no legal right to use the access road, there is a means to approach the town, request that an easement be granted, and that seems to be taking place. I'm going to make some comments about the actual driveway design, but I want to make that point again. I know I've said it many times. The Driscolls support the idea of the alternative access. There's all kinds of expensive construction work that the developer is proposing in order to try to, you know, fit a square peg into a round hole, as you've said. That's not to say there's no cost to using the other form of access, the access road. But all of these changes are really very awkward and expensive, and they don't even necessarily solve the problem, including the basic problem that one of your board members has just expressed. There's a lot to be talked about there. Just a few specific comments. These were discussed last night with the Driscolls. John mentioned Winston, but the curved design, while it achieves a slightly less extreme grade, makes the driveway more difficult to plow, and it's a change in the existing right-of-way. And by the way, the right-of-way plan shows this access area that going through the property belonging to 728 is part of the right-of-way. It only goes to one house, but it's part of the right-of-way. So these easement issues apply to changes to the driveway. The design The design doesn't indicate whether the driveway it doesn't show the Driscoll driveway on the Driscoll property. I believe it meets the driveway it meets the property in a different place. There's been no talk by the developer of what they would do to correct that alignment, and they would have to, if you were to agree to this, there would have to be a condition that any failure to meet the existing driveway would be corrected to the current condition. Current driveway has an electrical line and lights along it and a very attractive natural stone wall. Those would have to be recreated and moved if you were going to move the location of the driveway as a condition, if you were to agree to this. And we don't support the change, but that certainly would have to be a condition if the board did. We also noted that we don't know what the site distances are now at the exit from this driveway, but when you look at this plan, you can see that there's a handicapped access ramp on the left side. There's a row of arborvitae, and those are located right at the corner. And there's been no discussion or analysis of a sight line going from the driveway onto the other part of the right-of-way. That's essential in order to understand whether this is even a safe proposal from that perspective. And so, finally, as with all these other plan changes to attempt to meet safety and access standards and improve aesthetics based on the use of this right-of-way, these changes impose a lot of added cost on an affordable housing development. It doesn't make any sense to me that this is being pursued with such vigor. And, with mutual agreement, I assume it would be possible to continue this hearing until the town meeting in December, at which time you would know whether the town will grant an easement to use the access road. And finally, an extension or a continuation of that sort would tell us that the developer intends to use the alternative access if an acceptable plan can be reached with the board. There's no way for us to know now, if you reach a decision now, and you may be forced to, but whether the developer would even make use of the easement if it were made available. I understand your attorney, Peter, has talked about it, and at the last meeting, they indicated they were willing to look at it. They're developing a plan to show how it would be used. But where's the assurance that that would happen? We're just kind of left puzzled as to that question. A couple of other comments. These have to do with landscaping. We've talked about these before, but specifically, if you left the landscaping the way it is as a single row of arborvitae, at least these should be large arborvitae. Green giant is the species, the type of arborvitae that, rather than the type that's on here, which apparently is a type of arborvitae that's eaten by deer all the time. So it wouldn't survive. We've asked for another proposal for alternative trees. The developer hasn't come back with anything. So we're saying specifically, at least they should be green giant arborvitae. I agree with the comments from the planning board, and I made these same comments in a previous letter, that good landscaping, attractive landscaping would have have a row of trees, probably a row of bushes, or smaller trees, that it wouldn't just be a straight single row. So I think I feel as if, Laurie, let me one other comment about construction management. We really haven't had all that much discussion about it. It's a huge issue with this access road, with this right-of-way being the main access. And Mr. Driscoll and his son, they both work in landscaping and construction. And they both sat there last night and said, they know how big these vehicles are. They know what types of vehicles would be used in this construction project. And their feeling is that without a full-time police detail, you would never be able to assure the safety, even during construction, for the Driscolls getting in and out of their driveway, because these are really big trucks. And as you're only partially constructing the road, they've got to be able to turn, they've got to be stored somewhere. There's not good visibility. And meanwhile, the Driscolls have to get in and out of their house all the time. Mr. Driscoll goes in and out at least 5 or 6 times a day. So it doesn't seem that we've discussed that at all. I know there's a construction design, turning design a little bit in the plans that were submitted, just because you have a new driveway design to show, where construction vehicles would be. But I don't think there's been any attention paid to that. And I would certainly say that the board should have a condition that if they did approve this, that there would have to be a police detail during the lower construction of the driveway and up and beyond the Driscoll's driveway. These are just some specific points that we wanted to raise last night. I have prepared a letter, and you will have an opportunity to see it. It looks like you're going to have a final hearing at least next week. You'll have my letter before then. If we can discuss further what I've said. I just want to say, I feel as if a lot of time and energy is being wasted here. There could be an effort to try to improve this project. I understand it's still going to be dense. The Driscolls do too. I haven't seen any proposals to reduce the number of units, but I do think that changing the form of access would be a significant improvement, and it would address a lot of the safety issues that seem to be so plaguing board members, and certainly we are very concerned about them. So I just throw that out there. I mean, why not continue this hearing and allow, and if you make a decision and then you're talking about coming back and asking for an amendment, which was the procedure that Peter Freeman talked about at a previous hearing, in order to come in with a new plan for the alternative access, well, that's just going to take, excess time that really is unnecessary. I mean, it just seems to me that a continuation would be in everyone's best interest. It's definitely in the project's best interest, because maybe I'm mistaken, but I believe that access road is very beneficial to the developer, and it certainly is beneficial to the public and to the town, and very much so to the immediate neighbors. Thank you.
Thanks, Marion. Peter, do you have any response to Marion's suggestion about a continuance?
Yes, number one, I appreciate what she said and her continued courtesy. I understand that it's actually a logical question. In part, that's why I asked my curiosity question a little while ago. What I would say is we would consider that, discuss it with my client. I still think it makes sense to go forward with the next hearing. And if we believe either before then or more likely at that time that we would say, okay, let's hold off on a decision and continue, we would tell you. So, I don't want to just, reject it out of hand, but I can't say yes at this point. So we will certainly consider it and let you know.
If I may just add something, sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Celebrity.
Just a couple of comments, Attorney Marion Gedrich. So in our fourth meeting, we presented two options. I don't know if they were looked at or not, when we thought that possibly we could use the access road. We didn't hear anything. You talk about, working with the developer, the town working with the developer. There has been we haven't had any communication. I can't just stop my plans as they're shown right now, and with the hopes, with no assurance. So Peter asked the board whether or not they would possibly approve a project off the access road. We have zero assurance. How can I just halt my project? We've been doing this for 8 months, and with the hopes that they're going to approve a project when we haven't got a response, from our plans. Deb drew up two options of a driveway access off the access road. So can you explain to me that? Answer me that question. What do you recommend? I mean, we tried, we made our best effort to work with the town, but we're not getting any response here.
I mean, I think I can respond, and Mr. Freeman, tell me if I'm wrong, but what type of assurance are you looking for?
Well, that you would vote in favor or consider voting in favor if we are granted access to the access road.
I can tell you right now that if the town meeting were to vote in favor of allowing you access to the access road, we would certainly consider your plans.
Okay, I'd like to hear the whole board, please.
I mean, that's our job, is to consider whatever you put in front of us. That's
right. There was comments made that we didn't try to work with or present plans. So we presented plans on May 4th of this year. May 4th.
Right. But you don't have access, but you don't currently have access to that. So that's not part of this current application.
Right, but you could at least comment on it. Do we like it? We don't like it? You don't think you should comment on it?
I commented on that, and my comment was we can't consider things that we can't comment on because you don't have the right to use that road. That was the comment. No, we just finished. We did give you a response that night in live. We told you that. So if you got the approval of the town, then the board could consider it, but the board can't consider a project that it isn't capable of being implemented.
Rob, let me respond because I do agree with Mr. Mullen. We in fact said, and I said it myself, that we wanted to present it because I think it had been suggested by Tim to do that, which made sense at the time, just to show you that we were giving it some thought. But Rob, I actually did say, and I agree that we said you really can't consider that at this point because we don't know what's going to happen with any potential town meeting vote. And I did ask you folks, the ZBA members, to deal with what we have on the table. I will say this, which hopefully is helpful, at least in response to one thing that Ms. McKettrick said. You know, if the town meeting does vote it, unless there's some other unforeseen thing, but we would certainly come back with revised plans. And if they were approved and it was a decision that, you know, in our respects was livable and still kept the project feasible, you know, I honestly can't imagine that Rob wouldn't avail himself of that alternate access. In part, that would be the thing that would, you know, make you folks, the ZBA members, comfortable in approving a project without that access that you're so concerned about. So, you know, that's why we said we would work with doing a plan for town meeting, work with Tim and whatever else to, you know, promote it at town meeting.
Okay, so in light of the fact that, you know, almost all of the issues we've discussed throughout the past several weeks concern the use of the access road. I think that Marion's suggestion, and it's one that you and I have discussed, Peter, makes a lot of sense because it makes a lot of those issues go away. And since those are the ones that we've been primarily focused on, it seems to me that that would be in your client's favor. I'm curious as to what you think might be resolved during, you know, the first 90 minutes of our next and last meeting that would change your mind one way or the other. But you know, I'm putting you on the spot, and I don't want you to answer if you don't feel comfortable doing it. But it just seems to make sense to me.
Yeah, I hear you, and I also can't think of any logical reason why what you just said about the next hearing, if you know, it would be going through a decision based on the existing plan, so it's not likely to give us new information to inform a decision about a continuance. I think if I would suggest this, and Rob, if you want to talk to me privately for a few minutes, I'm sure that the chair and the board would give us a few minutes to talk privately. But you know, what I would suggest is let's keep that date. Rob and I will talk, what's today, Tuesday, you know, and just let staff know in the next couple of days if we want to proceed with the full hearing. We would have to, you know, have the hearing to announce a continuance if that's what happened. If that is what happens, but at least that gives us a little leeway to reflect and, you know, not make a decision right this moment. So
that's totally fair. I think that's a good plan. Why don't we do that? Why don't you and Mr. Celebrity talk tomorrow or whenever and come up with a decision on that proposal? And if you think that a continuance is the right move, let us know, and we'll open the hearing on the 20th for the sole purpose of continuing. If not, we'll proceed as we've discussed previously.
Yeah, thank you. That's certainly fine, and that's fair. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Good compromise. All right, Marion, I see your hand is up.
I think you've pretty much gone to the point where you need, I mean, I'm very happy to hear you discussing the idea of continuance. I just wanted to say to Mr. Celeberti, only on behalf of the Driscolls, that back in May, when you submitted that plan, we wrote a letter to the board. We said, the Driscolls said, yes, they would support that plan. And I think that's pretty important. They're the closest neighbors. We've said in the letter that you haven't seen yet, you'll see it tomorrow. It'll be on the website, I hope. We would support a vote at town meeting to provide that access, subject to actually seeing the plan and the warrant article, which I haven't seen, but I understand there's one being worked on. So that's as far as I can go at this point, but I couldn't be more, I want to be absolutely clear about that. From the beginning, it's been my belief that that was the proper way to access this site. It's a difficult site anyway, but there are many advantages. I listed some of them in my most recent letter. So thank you. I hope you'll consider that idea. I think it would be good for everybody.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Marion.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I think we're going to close for tonight. And we'll be back here one way or the other on the 20th. Peter, if anything comes up, if you want to discuss, please reach out. Thank you, everybody, for your comments tonight, and we'll see you in a week.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Right.
Good night.
Recording stopped.